as a family member, how do you even have that conversation that you've lost a couple of 100 crores or whatever that amount is?
Let's not go back to there.
You've done investments in over 40 startups, right?
Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Aarti Gupta, a distinguished Harvard alumnus and the Chief Investment Officer of the Jagran Family Office and Anikarth Ventures. She has independently led investments in 33 companies through Anikarth Ventures. Aarti also serves as the national head of the FICCI Flow startup cell, and Inc42 has also recognized her as a top woman torchbearer. Sitting in one of the most opulent homes I've been to, we explore Aarti's incredible journey and dive into the complexities of managing a family office. I'm Sandeep Jetwani, the host of the Create Wealth podcast and co-founder of Deserve.
Aarti, one of the most interesting things about what you were talking about is the fact that you are not only sort of running the family office, but you're also the CIO, right?
Yeah.
We've found that family members are not always the CIO. Sometimes they've had a professional, which sort of creates a bit of distance from the performance in some cases. In your case, you've sort of rolled up your sleeves and said that you will run it yourself. How did you come to that decision and how has that panned out?
So the process basically began with me. I was getting my PhD at IIT Kanpur, and my father-in-law was sort of struggling with some investments to keep track of it and stuff like that. And I offered to sort of help out with it, right? I started putting that together and then sort of suggesting changes, like,
Yeah.
simple changes from moving from FDs to FMPs and then sort of adding equities. So from day one, I've been very active in managing the investments, or rather investing. I first was the CIO and then started managing the family office instead of the other way around, right?
Got it.
And we do take help of external professionals as well. But at the end of the day, I personally, at least with the experience of my own journey, feel that for a family office, it's very important that the family member is very active with the investment decisions as well, right?
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, it is the hard-earned money of the family. And nobody understands family's financial goals better than a family member. So it's very important that the family member is active investment participant as well, or an investment decision maker.
We are seeing that very actively. A lot of families like yourself have formalized the investment process.
Yeah.
At which point did you think that it was now the right time to set up the family office?
Sandeep, it actually wasn't like a formal decision, like, a meeting in one particular day that let's sit and do this. I think for us, it was more of a gradual process. But in general, I think as the Indian economy is progressing and as more and more family businesses are converting into business families, right? Where they're separating business from individual families, and there's a concentration of private wealth. I think that's when the concept of family office sort of emerges, because the families realize that we need like a home vehicle, right, to take care of families' needs, which is outside the realms of the business. So while for us it did not formally start as on any particular date, right, it's been a 14-year gradual process. I think we've been in this sort of a formal setup for about at least 4 to 5 years now, right? Like we're operating out of an office and a full-time dedicated staff and
Sure.
taking care of the family's needs.
And one of the things, Aarti, when you were telling me is that investments are made actually in individual names, whereas there is a centralized sort of approach to figuring out the decision making. Can you just tell me a little bit more about how that actually works on a day-to-day basis?
I want to clarify this, that there is a particular model for family office. It does
Sure.
not work like that. Every family is different. So there is no one size fit all model. Like
Sure.
unlike how there are rules and regulations laid down by the SEBI for a listed company, right?
Sure.
It doesn't work like that in a family office. So for us, we realize the best way what works is we still maintain risk appetites for individual family members, and
Okay.
investments are made in individual family members' names.
Sure.
And at an overall level, obviously everyone's books are maintained and everyone's investment thesis are written. There is a family investment thesis at a broader level, investment policy document.
Yeah.
For individual smaller nuclear families, the larger family, and right up to, so for example, my daughter has a particular investment thesis, right?
Okay.
My husband has a different investment thesis. My father-in-law's investment thesis could be different, right? He's older, his
Yeah.
risk appetite is much lower. So everyone's investment works differently.
And in those cases, do those individuals also have a sort of point of view on their investment thesis, or is it something that you and the team centrally decide?
So we do discuss it,
Yeah.
right? At a broader level, it's discussed, and ideally, I particularly like the participation of everyone in the family, and that's what a family office, a sophisticated family office, eventually evolves into, right?
Sure.
At a broader level, every individual family member is or should be comfortable with the risk their profile is taking, and we make sure of that.
And so this investment thesis, once it is made, do the family members also then sort of get together to review the portfolio?
Yes.
Is that also something that happens? What do you think is the right end state for you? Where do you want this to be?
No, where we do a quarterly, semi-annually and annual reviews with the family members. Maybe the kids can sit together every year and they sort of review, without, my daughter is quite young, so maybe I don't want to give out the numbers yet, but at least
Sure.
she should understand the broad asset allocation. That's how you sort of induct the next gen into this whole process, and they take ownership of their investments and they learn about it as well, right? So I don't think there is an end goal. I think it's a constant learning every single day, and I think there's scope for improvement all the time.
You refer to this concept of an investment policy statement. And for those of us who are not so familiar with it, it's sort of a document that guides portfolio construction. How does that look for the family office that you run?
So broadly, it is sort of an investment guide. It sort of talks about how much risk an individual is willing to take. So it's again a very evolving document. But at a basic level, the idea is that at least every individual or every nuclear family has a rough idea about what sort of risk the family office is taking on behalf of them when they make their investment decisions.
Got it. And because this is a tricky thing where you're actually responsible for the future of a lot of people in the family with limited involvement from their side, right? Like they are.
Yeah. And it's even more tricky. Trust me, if it's tricky for somebody who's a professional, as a daughter-in-law in the family, it's multiply it 10x because you're eating meals every day together, and you're part of the family, right? And when things are great, like last 2 years, everything's been hunky-dory, right? Like we've all seen double-digit returns, if not triple in certain investments, right? Like, so everything's great. But I actually started looking after investments in 2008 and right before the crash, right? So you can imagine, I actually had my whole ragging phase, like you say in college. So I had that, like test through fires right in the beginning. So I know not to get too happy when the markets are up. I know that things are going to be okay when the markets are down, and how to sort of be honest and truthful about things with the family, right?
But this sounds very interesting. Like as a professional, it's hard enough to tell a client whose hard-earned money you're managing that, look, it's down 30-40%, which is what it was or more in 2008. As a family member, how do you even have that conversation that you've lost a couple of 100 crores or whatever that amount is? How do you go about that?
Let's not go back to there. But I think what helps, and at least what I've learned, is if you have a process in place, right? And if the process is correct, right? And if you've made certain decisions based on fundamentals, and if those fundamentals have not changed, right? Then you're okay, right? Because you have a stand, like a backing to stand on, right? You can say that this was what my thought process was, and we have a 10-year horizon on it. Currently, it's just year 2, year 3. We do expect it to come back, right? And sometimes investments work, sometimes they don't work, right? But the truth is, at the end of the day, if you do have a well-defined process in place, then I think it gets a lot easier to sort of explain your decisions.
Yeah, so I think that seems very clear, and I think you've articulated it really beautifully, that if you have a strong process and also you've communicated that process, it gives everyone a lot of confidence. And I'm curious, like since 2008 and a lot of volatility in this period, newer asset classes have come up. How has the asset allocation in itself changed or evolved over these last 15, 16 years?
So when I started sort of looking into it, we're a typical Banya family. 90% of our assets were in FDs, right? So over time, we've sort of moved to a more sophisticated and a well balanced portfolio. But I feel the way, at least, we approach dividing or investing is through wealth pools.
Okay.
And the concept of it, honestly, I first learned. I went to Wharton to do like a course in investments, and I attended Professor Ashwin Chabra's class.
Okay.
And he's written this book called The Aspirational Investor, where he talks about wealth pools, right?
Okay.
And I found that concept so fascinating because that's how I feel that truly one should, at least a family of a sizable corpus, should approach investing, right? So that's how we do it. We divide our wealth into different pools.
Okay.
We have a safety pool, we have a lifestyle pool, and we have an aspirational pool.
Interesting.
And each pool has X amount of money allocated into it, and each pool has its goals defined, and then we take risk and asset allocation accordingly, right? Ours is about 10 to 12% in the safety pool, 10 to 12% in the aspirational pool, and the rest in the lifestyle pool. That's how we approach
So it's
investing.
very interesting you say that, because even how we think about asset allocation is about income growth and aspirational or growth plus, right?
Yeah.
And the conventional approach has been that you have a percentage of the overall pie, which
Yes.
you keep readjusting
Yes.
periodically,
Yes.
right? And do you think that this is only a function of generational, or within the same generation also you see differences in how these pools are allocated?
So at a larger family, or at least individual family, it's not important that my daughter has a safety pool,
Sure.
right? So at a larger family level, you do the pool allocation,
Got it.
and then at a lower individual level, you sort of do the asset class allocation,
Got
right?
it.
So if you know that for the children or for the next gen, they don't need the money, it can be long only. You put them all in equities. There's no point, if the horizon is 15 years,
Got
there's
it.
no point putting it into fixed incomes.
I'm very curious about the third part, which is the aspirational pool, because that's where essentially I suspect you also set up Anikarth Ventures,
Yes.
which is the sort of startup investing arm of the group. How did that concept of branding it separately come up? Why did you decide to carve out and call it something else? Because I think that's very interesting. Not many people do that.
So, I've been born and brought up in an entrepreneurial family. My father's actually a farmer turned industrialist, right? And so I've seen businesses being built up ever since I was born.
Sure.
And so there's somewhere that entrepreneurial kida within me. And I got very fascinated while I was sort of doing all the investments. I sort of delved into startups or unlisted space also as an asset class diversification, right?
Sure.
Like we need to start thinking of this might be interesting, how do we increase the returns a little bit? And the more I sort of started exploring that asset class, I realized that this is fascinating, this entire space of how young founders are coming up with brilliant ideas and building businesses, and I wanted to be a part of that story. But at that same time, I did not want to pass on that risk to the larger family as well.
Sure.
So that's why we sort of carved out Anikarth Ventures, which is my husband and my private baby sort of a thing, and we do direct investments through there.
Okay.
For the larger family office, we do unlisted only through funds,
Got it.
right? And
So funds meaning category 2 AIFs, where there's a professional fund manager, and you've outsourced that activity.
yes.
Whereas for your sort of pool, you have this direct investing vehicle.
Yes, so we've carved out that direct investment vehicle through which we invest into early stage startups, where I sort of roll up my sleeves and I'm hands-on with them, sort of helping out on how to build the businesses, right?
In all of these startup investing opportunities, I think the issue of access is very real, right? Like, how do you know that here is an exciting founder setting up an exciting business that you want to be a part of? How do you deal with that? How do you get the message out that you are investing in a particular type of companies? How do founders reach out today?
Oh, it's very difficult. Let me tell you, like when I started, I had no idea how to do this. I did not study for this. Neither did I inherit sort of a network of people around me. Sitting out of Kanpur, I think I was the probably the only one who was investing into this unlisted space, right? And initially it was a bit of a struggle. I joined a bunch of angel networks, made some co-investment deals through funds we had invested into. I think the minute you put out a message saying that I have money and I'm investing into startups, you will get deals. Like, on average, we get about 4 to 5 deals a day. But the fact that are you getting good deals is the question, right? And that took some time. I'm going to be very honest about it. It's not like I was getting like the cream of deals from day one or something like that. I think that needs the proof of the pudding sort of a thing. Like you need to work with certain entrepreneurs. You need to sort of show what you're in for and stuff like that. And then the word starts spreading out. I think still in India, we're a small ecosystem.
Yeah.
So things about founders spread very fast and things about investors spread very fast.
And as a family office, what does it take to be a good investor? Like what does a founder find value in working specifically with a family office? Is it the fact that you have a perspective on business coming from the background that you do? Or is it about the fact that you have a much longer time horizon as opposed to a fund which has to deliver an exit? So what is that conversation like with a founder?
I think family office patient capital is a big plus because we don't have a fund life where, so if it's a good company, I can stay invested till IPO, whether it's 10 years, 12 years, and if the company is doing well, my investment is good, right? So I'm okay to stay invested. So patient capital is a huge advantage which comes with family offices. Also the expertise of running a business, whether it's their existing business which they can offer help with, or in general about running a business as well, right? Today a lot of investors who have not ran their own businesses, they miss out on certain skill sets, right? And I think family offices bring in that, especially the ones which have been made out of family businesses, right? Like so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually see this new category of founders coming out of family businesses and starting up and taking external capital to fund that now. When it comes to Anikarth, I think you've done investments in over 40 startups, right?
Yeah.
What is the process of engagement after you've made the first investment?
So I think for that, Sandeep, we sort of leave it to the founders in terms of how involved they want us to be as investors, right? At the end of the day, we very strongly believe that it's your business to run. You're the captain of the ship. We are here to sort of guide you and help you when you need.
Sure.
We do have a process where we sort of require quarterly reports, and we try and have at least one meeting with the founder every quarter, if not every 6 months.
Okay.
There are certain founders who sort of like a monthly meeting, they need a little more hand holding, especially at the early stage. And we're open to that. If it's a space where we can help, we're more than happy to sort of be there and be that sounding board for them.
Sure. And this seems like a lot of like activity running, coordinating with multiple family members, and then you are sort of also taking investment decisions, and then finally Anikarth, so which is a whole new business of its own. Besides this, I actually see you being involved in a lot of industry fora where you're contributing time. How do you manage that balance at your end today?
So I think from ever since I remember, I've always wanted to sort of be a change maker and put my voice out there. And I'm a very strong supporter of women empowerment. And that's where I sort of contribute my time, whether it is with organizations like Vicky Flow, whether it's with Harvard Global We, and a multitude of other organizations. I have a little bit of a pie chart where I know that in a week I need to give in X hours to this, X hours to that, and X. And it doesn't always work very systematically like that. But in a broad sense, I know that this is how I need to divide my time. A lot of these forums and organizations are great learning platforms as well, right? And that is very important because once you're out of school, I think for a lot of people, other than the day-to-day business experience, learning stops. How do you upskill yourself, right? How do you see, how do you put your head out and see what is happening other than your immediate business environment? So these platforms or organizations provide a great platform for that, right?
You, among other things, you're also on the board of Jindal Steel. right, as an independent director. It seems like this independent directorship is a big responsibility. It comes with liabilities also.
Yeah.
Uh, how have how did you decide to take up the responsibility? What's your advice for other folks likely to become independent directors?
So it's been a great learning experience for me. I think fortunately I feel one of the most interesting things I've done. So I wanted to sort of learn what does it mean to be a director on a board. So I did this course, and then I went ahead and gave my exam to become an independent director
Yeah.
for this, and then you get listed in it, right? And
Yeah.
I'm so proud to say that we are, out of a board of 6, we're 3 women on the board. So
Wow.
it's a highly progressive company
Yeah.
with very forward-thinking management.
Yeah.
To have 3 such diverse thinking board, right? Not just in terms of gender, but also in terms of age, in terms of education, and experience which they bring on board.
And as independent directors, how easy is it to ask tough questions which are sometimes, not very obvious? I'm sure with your outside-in perspective, there's a lot of doubts that you have about why a business is being run a certain way, why certain decisions are taken. So how should independent directors even play that out?
Fortunately, my experience has been nothing short of fantastic, right? Like the management has been very encouraging towards the board. We're free to ask questions. So I can only share my experience as of now. But I do know that sometimes it can get a little awkward.
Yeah.
But I feel with the way things are now and the liability you hold or are exposed to as an independent director, you'd rather ask the uncomfortable question
Yeah.
than wait for something to go wrong.
Absolutely. And I think you're sort of representing other shareholders in the company. And I think without having the shareholding yourself, so it seems like a massive responsibility overall.
Yeah, absolutely. No, totally. And it's something which you need to stay true to. And I think it as a family business as well, right? I think it's in the interest of the business to have a third party perspective, right? It works in its benefit to sort of have someone look at it from the outside and tell you, hey, maybe this is a different perspective. Why don't you look at it?
Yeah.
So if you sort of play your cards right and have the right team on board,
Right.
then everything should sort of synchronize and work in tandem.
And to that extent, do you see even privately held family businesses thinking about getting external directors?
I know some of them do, but I
Sure.
think it's a great step for private businesses as well.
Right.
To sort of have someone external and have the right processes and things in place, right? Run it like a publicly listed company,
Yeah.
so that at least when you're going for the listing, things are in place.
I noticed one thing, and we were chatting about this before we started recording, is about this whole experience of backing women entrepreneurs. And you said that, you're not setting out to exclusively back women entrepreneurs, and you look at them on merit. How should leaders like yourself, investors like yourself, think about this conundrum?
So we don't have a gender lens at Anikat Ventures, right? We don't invest only in women-focused startups, or we don't look at a particular venture just because it's women-founded. So we're gender agnostic, and I think that's how it should be. Because the minute you sort of and kudos to funds who are only supporting women, right? We are not that, but I think honestly speaking, there is a study which sort of supports that women-run businesses in the long run outperform male-run businesses, right, in terms of profit, especially in the public markets, I feel, right? Like women investors are more savvy compared to male investors. I don't know if this data set is true because they're a small subset or whatever it is, but I think they would make great investors.
My thesis is because they hold the investment longer and they're willing to live with the volatility, as opposed to men who want to react to every external stimulus. And the reality is that at the end of the day, investing is more emotional than it is rational, right? To that extent, I think women are better at EQ, for sure.
100%.
And if they are better at EQ, there's no reason why they should be better at managing emotions during market cycles. So they don't get overexcited when things are going good.
Yeah.
They don't get too depressed when things are going bad, right? And I at least in my experience, I see that very clearly.
No, they're already on a roller coaster ride when it comes to house, work, everything else,
Yeah.
right? So they know how to manage their emotions.
Yeah.
So rightly put. And I sort of, through my foundation, run this program called I Am My Own Lakshmi, which invests or rather trains women to invest
Wow.
themselves and manage their own investments. Because even today, I think in India, working women also at the end of the day are handing their paychecks either to their husbands or to their fathers and asking them to invest.
Yeah.
And my thing is that you do not need a special qualification to learn how to invest your money. If you're earning it, that means you're qualified enough to investing it as well, right? So
I think that's a fantastic. It's called I'm my own Lakshmi.
yeah, it's called I Am My Own Lakshmi.
That's a fantastic one, Aarti. And on that note, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, and doing it in this beautiful setting here makes it extra special.
Thank you
Thank you so
Sandeep.
much.
The pleasure's been all mine.
Thank you.